Uh, Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. It depends where you are. I'd like to welcome you to this virtual panel on the GCC under fire, strategic choices and the future of collective security. Let me first just introduce myself. My name is Abdullah Baabood. I'm the director of the Gulf. I'm a board director in the Gulf International Forum. And I would like to welcome all the attendants, but also to welcome all the panelist speakers, the esteemed colleagues, and all of you ladies and gentlemen to this very, very important point. Thank you for joining us at this very critical moment. As you know, we meet today in a period of theoretical uncertainty. It's not theoretical uncertainty, that's what I meant, but it is in the midst of active regional conflict. We are witnessing it ongoing now as we speak. The ongoing war between the United States, Israel, and Iran has moved beyond contained confrontation. It has expanded into direct retaliation and counter-retaliation, and the Gulf region has not remained insulated, as you have been hearing in the news. Recent Iranian missiles and drone attacks on several GCC states have marked a dangerous turning point. As you know, civilian infrastructure, aerospace, strategic facilities have all been affected, whether directly targeted or indirectly exposed. The message is very clear. The Gulf is no longer a peripheral arena. It is part of the landscape escalation. For the Gulf Cooperation Council, this moment represents a profound test.
Dr. Baabood, sorry to interrupt you, but your camera's off, I think.
Okay, how do I do that? I'm not sure how do I do it.
Your camera's on now. It's working. It's working now.
It's working now, but if I go this way, it's off.
Yes. We
Okay.
don't see you. You are in the dark.
I see. Okay. Okay, I apologize about that. So the Gulf is actually at a very profound moment. The whole Gulf Cooperation Council and its security cooperation and initiatives is all under strains and tests at the moment. We need to understand where we are going, where we are heading as a Gulf region. You know, do we continue with our security cooperation? Do we continue with our defense mechanisms and missile defense mechanisms? Do we continue with deepening the integration within the Gulf states to include security as well as cooperation and economics and so on? It's a really important testing point for all of us, and we need to look at it. I really appreciate the Gulf International Forum for thinking of this topic and for organizing it and for bringing all inviting all the speakers to this event. And I also would like to introduce them as we go. And I was actually need to look at the names to make sure that I got everybody in the right direction. I want to introduce, first of all, Dr. Dania Thafer, who's the head of the Gulf International Forum. And we'll be also introducing Dr. Ebtesam Al-Ketbi, who is the head of the Emirates Center. And we have two speakers from Saudi Arabia, Dr. Aziz Alghashian, who's an academic, a well-known academic and focusing on security. And last but not least, who just joined us, Rashid Al-Mohanadi, who's is a non-resident fellow member, but also he is a well-known security expert. So let me start by asking you, Dr. Dania, and that is, where do you think this whole issue of this conflict that is now engulfing the whole region, what does it mean for the Gulf security, and where are we going with our security?
Thank you, Dr. Baabood, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here with my colleague, very busy trying to follow what's going on. I'm here in Qatar, and it's been quite interesting. And my colleagues are across the region, and we're really grateful for them to join us today. You know, for the Gulf states, it's an incredibly important period. You know, since 1970, when the Iranian Revolution happened, this is the first time the 6 Gulf countries were under attack. I would say most of them, 5 of them simultaneously, and then Oman a little bit later. I guess that was a grace period given by Iran. So this situation is what the Gulf states have sought to deter for decades, to avoid direct entanglement in a war involving Iran. And now the issue is the Gulf is becoming the operational foreground of a broader U.S., Israel, Iran war, which is of great concern. And, you know, just taking it a little bit back and looking at the rhetoric coming out of Washington, it's obvious that this conflict is beyond a deterrence war. It's not just a punitive strike. Seems, based on President Trump's rhetoric, that this is a war looking at substantial changes on the ground in Iran, perhaps even, and the strategy for that seems to be coercive exhaustion, since this is mainly done through warfare, through air warfare, and the goal is really to sustain military pressure, eliminating certain targets and leaders through decapitation, psychological attrition, and systematic erosion of state capacity. Obviously, it doesn't appear that the U.S. or Israel are interested in, and so this is the only way I think they are trying to achieve fundamental changes on the ground, or perhaps regime change. So basically, they're looking for Iran to surrender through cumulative destabilization. However, I do think that there's a other option on the table that they are considering, having Iran, rather than having complete regime change, at least transforming Iran politically to reduce it in a state of chronic vulnerability, something similar to Syria, which can be subject to strikes without having the ability to have credible retaliation. Some interesting issues I've noticed from the perspective of the Gulf states is, you know, really it is a sobering reality, especially the fact that Iran really has no plausible pathway to conventional victory against the US or Israel. So therefore, the strategy is not oriented towards triumph from the Iranian perspective, is oriented towards cost imposition. And sadly, this cost is very pricey, very costly for the GCC states. One is trying to inject risk into energy markets, destabilize maritime routes. You know, points. There's so many different ways, and actually, the big one is the drone attacks on the Gulf states. So really, Iran is just trying to survive under pressure and try to establish some sort of deterrence. And the Gulf's biggest strength, which is its economic centrality in the region, has become the lever of coercion for Iran. So this is very problematic from the Gulf states' perspective, since there's not a capability of Iran to have conventional warfare with the main actors that they're at war with. And it just seems the Gulf is the one that's going to absorb a lot of the shocks from the war. Economically speaking, it's very, very costly. For example, you know, most activities are canceled here in Qatar, and you know, this is costly in the long run. So I think Iran is trying to, in a way, see if the Gulf states would in some way influence the international community to end this conflict, because the costs could be internationalized, as I mentioned, about the energy markets and the maritime security and all of these concerns. But for right now, I mean, the Gulf states have their first line of defense is their integrated air and missile defense system, which has been actually quite successful. If you being here in Qatar, I've seen the interceptions happen in the sky, and actually, you know, you don't totally feel like there's actually a war happening. Which, given the amount and the scale of missiles that have been sent over the skylines here and across the Gulf. The Gulf states are obviously sharing early warning intelligence, looking at how to protect critical infrastructure. So the problem is that Iran right now is escalating beyond the original threat threshold, which was, you know, attacking U.S. bases. It has expanded it where it's attacked civilian areas, and this suggests a broader pattern to widen the conflict, and in some ways is going to narrow the strategic agency of the GCC states, maybe not being bystanders per se, but also forced to take action. And I think Arabia and UAE have been most vocal about these points, and there is a convening very shortly among the GCC as an institution with leaders of the Gulf to talk about what's the next steps of this conflict. I do think that Iran thinks it has time on its side, that the GCC states would try to pressure the international community, and I think that's the game that Iran is trying to play right now. And I do think something interesting, and I'll say this and then I'll stop there, is, you know, this is pretty high on the threat hierarchy of the GCC states as a collective. And I think that the GCC states will, and are showing that they would unite under this threat, which brings up a lot of concerns raised about divisions within the Gulf states. So I think that's also a very interesting trend to watch moving forward, and I would like to see what happens at the ministerial GCC meeting that's coming up. Thank you.
We are all looking to find out what's going to happen in that meeting. Thank you, Dr. Dania Thafer. As you know, Dr. Dania Thafer is the Executive Director of the Gulf International Forum, and her expertise is actually on the Gulf security, Gulf region security, US Gulf relations, and the political economy of the Gulf states. And I also want to remind the participant, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the panel, as it were. Let me move to Dr. Ebtesam Al-Ketbi, who is the president and the founder of the Emirates Policy Center. And also she's a political professor, a professor of political science at the United Arab Emirates University. Dr. Ebtesam, in the aftermath of the February 28th escalation and the Iranian strikes in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, how does the UAE, United Arab Emirates, reassert its deterrence posture? And how does it coordinate with the US defense infrastructure on its territory? And what are the prospects of advancing a truly integrated GCC air and defense system, as Dr. Dania had just mentioned that this is something that could be on the agenda?
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. Glad to be with all my esteemed colleague. Look, Iran demonstrated that it can strike Dubai and Abu Dhabi directly. UAE demonstrated that it can intercept at scale, which is now on a daily basis we have it. But the deeper significance lies beyond interception statistics. The episode makes a doctrinal inflection point in the Gulf security. The first shift is conceptual. Deterrence is moving from interception to continuity. The UAE layered defenses performed effectively, yet even high interception rates do not eliminate disruption. What I mean is the airspace management, economic confidence, and urban vulnerability became part of the strategic battlefield. In other words, the objective was not kinetic impact, it was psychological and economic signaling. The response will therefore extend beyond missile interception. The UAE is likely to double down on counter drone saturation capabilities, harden the protection of aviation and logistic hub, and tighter integration between civil defense and military command structure. The aim is clear: deny strategic effect even when an attack occurs. Deterrence in the Gulf is evolving from protection of territory to protection of national system, economic flow, urban stability, and societal confidence. The second shift concerns coordination with the US defense infrastructure. Ballistic missile defense is measured in minutes. The reality makes real-time sensor fusion, shared early warning, and synchronizing battle management indispensable. Operational integration with US assets on Emirati territory will almost certainly deepen. I won't say it's going on, but if this attack is going on, certainly because we are allies, and I think all the Gulfies will be on the same situation. But this will occur alongside careful political calibration. UAE will avoid appearing as an automatic escalation node in a wider confrontation. The formula emerging is precise: maximum technical interoperability paired with maximum political autonomy. The UAE seeks protection without interim. The third and the last is regional. February 28 exposed structure asymmetry. Missile salvos do not respect border, but Gulf air defense still largely do. A fragmented architecture increases vulnerability to saturation. A truly integrated GCC air and missile defense system built around a shared real-time air picture, unified ballistic missiles, early warning, and coordinated engagement protocols. It is all of it is no longer an aspirational project. It is becoming a strategic necessity, and I think this is what will be discussed in the meeting of foreign ministers, I believe today or tomorrow. The barriers are political rather than technical. Sovereignty concern, data sharing sensitivity, and procurement diversification. Yet the cost of delay is now visible in civilian risk and economic exposure. This crisis may serve as catalyst that previous diplomatic effort could not. The strategic bottom line for UAE in this is that February 28 will not drive the UAE towards reckless escalation. It will drive it towards smarter deterrence, more layered, more resilient, more regionally integrated, and more operationally synchronized with the US. Iran sought to expand the battlefield. The likely long-term effect may instead be the acceleration of more cohesive and technologically integrated Gulf security architecture, which is a shift that could prove more consequential than the strike themselves. I want just to remind you and all my colleagues, this is not the first war we have it in the Gulf, but I would say this is the first war we attacking the civilian, and in that way, in continuous. We had before Iraq-Iran war, we have Kuwait Iraq invasion, and we've been in that war. But this war is different because Iran hasn't attacked all the Gulfs at the same time, all the GCC, even Oman, which was mediation between Iran and the US. And I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Ebtesam. And let me just quickly turn to Dr. Aziz Alghashian, who's a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum. And he's a researcher from Saudi Arabia who focuses on the kingdom foreign policies and strategies. Dr. Abdulaziz, you've heard what Dr. Ebtesam just said about what the UAE security policy would look like in the future, given, of course, the challenges that it's facing now. And as she said, this is not new, it has been ongoing. So how do the recent attacks mark the effective end of Saudi Iran rapprochement? Do they or don't they? And can Riyadh compartmentalize the escalation? Can it contain it? Or might this actually reshape the relationship and also reshape US-Saudi defense ties, particularly in terms of deterrence, cooperation, security guarantees, and advanced military integration? Like Dr. Ebtesam has been saying, this is what the UAE is going to go for. And will it also integrate more within the Gulf security architecture? Dr. Abdulaziz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah, and it's great to join everyone here on this fantastic panel. And I'm glad that we're all safe. I'm glad that we're all okay, and long may it last, inshallah. I would say the following. I think when it comes to the attempt to try to compartmentalize this conflict, in my opinion, I think it's just very, very difficult. I think the entire GCC, and also in particularly Saudi, will try to make sure to isolate themselves, as you mentioned in your introduction. But the Gulf Iran situation is a particular one. This relationship is a particular one, and especially the security aspect of this relationship is a particular one, because it's two things. Firstly, it's very much dependent on external factors, rather than there are factors that are in our hands. There are just too many external factors, like, for example, the whims in Washington, D.C., or the lobbying of Netanyahu and others. These are aspects that are very much factors that influence a lot of the times the GCC Iran rapprochement or relations at large. And the other thing is that what is worth really focusing more on is the fact of positionality. I think Dr. Dania mentioned this earlier. We in the Gulf are the front line of other people's wars. We are the front line of a war with the United States and Iran and Israel. And as a result, this really makes us, it becomes very difficult, almost impossible to compartmentalize. There was an immense amount of diplomatic capital that was invested in the rapprochement with Iran. And this is coming from a Saudi perspective. They invested a great deal. And I think they really were convinced that the best way to achieve security with Iran is to talk more with it, to address and engage its security concerns. And let me just say this: I think the approach that it had was, I think Dr. Ebtesam mentioned this also. It was a psychological approach. It was a way of, to be honest with you, being sort of like a psychiatrist who was talking to a patient that suffered from a great deal of anxiety and who had violent outbursts. It was a meticulous process. It was not easy, and that took a lot of energy, and it took a lot of capital that it could have been using for attracting investment, or it could have been using for attracting tourists, but they allocated it to this rapprochement. And I think, in my opinion, now we will see a different mode of diplomacy. I don't anticipate cutting of relations. I don't anticipate that. I think that will be there. But I think where we're going to see, or what we're going to see from the Saudi diplomacy, and I wonder if it's going to be also generally in GCC diplomacy, I hope more synchronized, is that there's going to be a more proactive diplomacy. I think this proactive diplomacy is going to do two things. In my opinion, the first thing, it's going to perhaps engage far more in Washington, D.C. I think it really needs to do this. This is really the one of the prime aspects that it needs to do. It needs to be more, it needs to not allow others influence the calculation of the White House on our security, or the implications of it. In other words, they need to start influencing, becoming more proactive there, and trying to manage and mitigate, or at least leverage, the whims in the White House, especially in this current administration, in our advantage. The other thing that I anticipate is something that also was mentioned earlier, which was a diversification of military procurement. I anticipate there is going to be now, diplomatic effort that will seek to elevate the deterrence capacities in the Gulf, and a deterrence not based on alliances, but I think deterrence based on capabilities, and also perhaps offensive capabilities. I think this is where we're going to see it. And the reason being is because I think when it comes to the relationship, for example, with the United States, I think it became clear that this has not reaped much deterrence. An alliance with the United States, even though we are officially major non-NATO allies, but this is really insignificant when it comes to deterrence. But also when it comes to, for example, the Saudi-Pakistan treaty, where was the deterrence there? So I think it's beginning to really challenge the notion of deterrence through or via alliances is limited. Rapprochement and the diplomatic approach of speaking to the anxieties has been limited. I think now there's going to be a diplomacy that really leads to the facilitation of a diversification of military procurement, improving the capabilities, and I think in tandem with what was mentioned earlier, create more of a common secularized GCC effort. I mean, I think I don't want to. I'll talk about this later, maybe, but it's becoming clear that the GCC the Gulf states really need each other far more than ever, and we have no other option. So I'll leave it at that. You're muted, Dr. Abdullah.
I'm muted.
Now we could hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Aziz. That is very helpful, and I think that will also we're going to dig deep into it in the second round, if we may. And let me just quickly introduce Rashid Al-Mohanadi, who is a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, and he has experience, as I said earlier, in defense industry and geopolitical risk advisory. The whole bio of all the panelists is available on the website. Rashid, what do you think in the current escalation? What strategies actually does Qatar have realistically at its disposal? And also diplomatically, militarily, and regionally, how Qatar might choose to deploy them in the coming weeks? And is it going to be different from what we've heard from our previous speakers in terms of each country's strategies, as it were?
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. First of all, I'd like to check, is my voice clear?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So I always like to start with unwrapping the situation, because it's a very convoluted and complicated situation. For the last few weeks, we've had this, what I like to call, strategic duality, where you had military buildup, in the essence of two aircraft carrier groups, repositioning of strike assets in Jordan and in Israel. But at the same time, we had the Omani and Qatari diplomatic track moving on, and until 24 hours before the U.S.-Israeli strikes, the statements of the Omani foreign minister was that things are going well. But and it comes back to this concept that I like to call optionality, not eventuality. I think Trump really wanted to have the option of striking rather than it becoming an eventuality, even though it did become an eventuality later on. And to explain the logic of the strike, and this is my humble assessment as a security analyst, I think it was it was an opportunity-based decision rather than a strategic choice that they made earlier on. And it's associated with extremely bad operational security on the Iranian side, where they had the meeting with the supreme leader and with the many of the commanders, his son, his daughter-in-law, and other people in an unprotected area, which could easily be tracked. So my assessment is that this was an opportunity-based decision, reinforced by the availability of military assets in the region. This, for me, explains the intensity and aggressiveness of the Iranian response or retaliation against all regional states. They did not leave any state unattacked. And it explains how aggressive the attacks were, because all of you live in the region. But I can tell you my personal experience when I woke up 9 a.m. To the news of the U.S.-Israeli strike. I was thinking, are they going to retaliate on Gulf Gulf actors? And an hour later, I started hearing all the intercepts, and the interceptions and the noise, the explosions. We all heard it from about 10:30, 11 p.m. a.m. in the morning until very late or early in the morning today. But it went down, and I associated it going down by the leader by two things. One is the leadership shift. We have a new leadership in Iran, and maybe they're assessing their strategic options, but also by the effective capability. I'm sure that the U.S. and Israeli strikes, especially when it comes to striking launch vehicles, the erectors used, because most stats say that the Iranians have quite a limited number of them. They're not difficult to build, but because of sanctions, they become difficult to build. And now today, at least until we get the official reports from the Ministry of Defense, in Qatar we only heard one salvo in the morning that was confirmed to be 5 missiles. I think a few of them were cruise missiles, which was new for at least the Qatar case, which got neutralized using fighter jets. So this is the unpacking. Now, when it comes to Qatari strategic decision making, I think, and as all the speakers say, it's not a Qatari decision making aspect. It's a GCC decision making at this stage, because we've all been attacked. Even Oman, the main mediator in this affair, has been attacked, and not a normal attack on potential U.S. or foreign military assets. It was an attack on a civilian port, civilian infrastructure, and attacking an accommodation for foreign expat workers. So I think we're all in one boat. The options vary. They can be diplomatic, and I think the just the lack of waves of missiles and drones and cruise missiles attacking the Gulf for the last few hours does offer a diplomatic off-ramp, at least from the Gulf point of view. I don't know, because in Iran the intensity of strikes have went up. But militarily, we've heard some rumors that some Gulf actors might get involved. Of course, our worry is that this might, take everything out of proportion. But as somebody who studied defense, what happened yesterday and what happened last year was a failure of deterrence. When Qatar was attacked in June, that was a failure of deterrence. When Qatar was attacked by the Israelis in September, that was a failure of deterrence. When the UAE and Saudi were attacked by, Iranian proxies in 2019 and 2022, that was a failure of deterrence. So we see this continuous failure of Gulf deterrence, even though we have US bases, even though we have alliances, even though we have really shiny gear. But it shows that we have a real issue that we need to manage. And the only way forward is to develop an intra-GCC defense capability. We cannot fully rely on alliances, and we cannot fully rely on exporting our security. And I think what happened last year to Qatar and what's happening now to the Gulf states does offer a really opportunistic conduit for us to actually develop this. We've seen many Gulf actors after the attack yesterday put a lot of their differences to the side and saying, let's focus on the real issue here, which is our security is being targeted. And so it's a double-sided sword. In terms of and I want to end by this, in terms of the capability of Gulf armed forces, I think, to give them credit, their ability to intercept 95 to 97% of projectiles fired at Gulf states. And this is not a symbolic attack. This is not something like in June where it was one salvo, even though I still believe that was the maximum the Iranians could deliver at that time for technical reasons. but multiple salvos for 14 hours. And, Dania, you live in Doha. Still people were able to go out, even though we advised people not to go out, but people were going out and enjoying a sort of normal life. So it shows that the Gulf has the capacity to develop defense capabilities, but the question is investment decisions. Where should we focus our next, procurement cycles? Where should we focus our next developmental decisions? And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rashid. I think this last point concludes like the most important thing about this round of questions. And I totally agree with you that this is an inflection point where the Gulf states need to think seriously about the future of their security and security arrangement. Let me quickly now just turn again back to Dr. Dania Thafer and ask her, do you think these attacks change the regional order, and how does it change it? You're muted.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Baabood, and it's something that we've been thinking about in general. What are the changes that are happening in the region, and what could possibly cause more fundamental change? And in terms of this conflict, so if the United States and Israel, for example, achieve their goals, will wake up to a radically transformed regional order that really has new assumptions when it comes to deterrence, security guarantees, the distribution of power. And so for the Gulf states, it's not only dealing with what's happening right now, but thinking about what's going to happen, the scenarios at hand. Obviously, there's a wide spectrum of scenarios that could happen. And, obviously we cannot highlight them all. But if we look at it analytically speaking and kind of assess different sorts of scenarios, for example, let's say we stop right here where we see decapitation happening. So it neutralizes the leadership, but it does not systematically collapse the institutions of Iran. So I think this would be probably stop the escalation at this point, but I think Iran would be viewed very differently from the perspective of the Gulf states. Obviously would be least costly in the short term, and I think the least disruptive path for the Gulf states, because they can absorb the shocks of what happened these last couple of days. In this case, stability would remain fragile but manageable. However, this scenario really depends on a couple of critical assumptions: that escalation ends at the strike, which is hard to imagine at this point. Obviously history suggests that we shouldn't take that very lightly. I think the most dangerous scenario, in my opinion, and again, there could be a wide spectrum of scenarios, is that Iran is severely weakened, but without regime change. So I think this is the most perilous scenario for the GCC, because I think vulnerability without collapse creates a sense of desperation. And we're seeing how desperation is manifesting itself in the region. I think Iran could be more volatile, unpredictable, incentivized as it is right now towards asymmetric retaliation. The Gulf, unfortunately, has been the most accessible pressure point for Iran. And in this scenario, I think the escalation ladder has a higher risk potential, and could cause chronic instability and many other issues. Now, scenario number 3, which these are big scenarios, and I think you can write reports and books about them. But let's say, for example, we experience regime change or the fall of the current political order in Iran, which still I think there's a long way to go before we get there. This outcome really carries out profound uncertainty. It could produce, obviously internal fragmentation, power struggles, and spillover of instability into the Gulf. But it also carries the possibility, however certain, of a more constructive regional dynamic if you say we're very lucky, extremely lucky, like in the case of Syria. Anyways, obviously the question isn't whether regime change is risky. It clearly is. The question is whether in strategic terms, it may ultimately prove less dangerous for the GCC than a crippled yet hostile Iran, which is the second scenario. Now, there's, again, a wide spectrum of things could happen, but I thought it intellectual exercise. Now, I think the other concern in terms of a change in regional order for the Gulf states is the last year or so has really shown that there is a hierarchy of alliance when it comes to the US relations in the region. Everyone knows, and I think we should have known that from the beginning. It's very clear if you read the national security strategy of the US, that the US is the ironclad ally. I mean, that Israel is the ironclad ally of the US. And let's say in Israel and the US's most, their most important objective by somehow having regime change in Iran, what would that mean in terms of US engagement in the region if that threat is gone? And so I think the Gulf states need to think about, if Iran was hypothetically defeated, and I think we're far from there, would that strengthen or weaken US Gulf security relations? And as we know, that nature abhors a vacuum. And so it's just something to consider. I think the Gulf states should be considering the immediate situation today, but in the long run, there are a lot of major considerations that the Gulf states should be prepared for, especially a region that I think we've seen, like, for example, with the Iraq war, what happened for the balance of power in the region when Saddam fell. What would happen to the balance of power of the region should Iran's leadership fall, or there's a fundamental change in Iran? I think this is something that should be thought about.
I totally agree with you, because many people are actually trying to figure out what the implications will be if this is to happen. But let me quickly move to Dr. Ebtesam. Thank you, Dr. Dania. And Dr. Ebtesam, do the February attacks, the 28th events attack, mark a shift in the UAE escalatory approach towards Tehran, and do they potentially promote a more deterrence-driven strategy, maybe centered on enhanced air power, missile defense, upgrading the UAE defense capability with the new technology and so on from Israel and the US? And is there going to be clearer red lines between the UAE and Iran? We'd like to hear your views from the UAE, Dr. Ebtesam.
Before I talked about that, I want to refer to what Aragdi said to Al Jazeera today, that our army units are now independent and isolated and operate according to general instructions that are provided to them in advance. Why I'm saying that? To explain why these attack to all GCC countries. Now there is no leadership in Iran giving order. So these groups, each one, it has from before instructions. So based on that, there is no coordination between those groups. And that's very dangerous situation all of us in GCC is facing. Coming back to your question, look, February 28th, of course, represent a serious moment, but not strategic rupture. The UAE approach toward Iran has long combined dialogue, de-escalation, and burden defense investments. That framework remains intact, but however, the scale and feasibility of recent events inevitably require assessment. So when direct strike affect sovereign territory, resilience must be strengthened. What we are likely to see is not abandonment of engagement, but reinforcement of deterrence. First, clearer strategic signaling, privately and public, about constitutes an acceptable escalation, particularly regarding civilian infrastructure, which is happening now in all GCC. Second, acceleration of defensive integration with partners, mainly GCC, in missile defense and counter drone capabilities. This will be framed correctly as stabilizing. A stronger defensive shield reduce miscalculation. Third, enhanced operational readiness to ensure rapid containment of any future incidents. Importantly, the UAE core objects remains regional stability. Any instability does not work with UAE projects, or I think all GCC countries in terms of economic continuity, secure trade routes, and diplomatic de-risking are fundamental national interests. Therefore, we should expect a dual track going forward. A firmer deterrent foundation combined with sustained diplomatic de-escalation. In essence, February 28th does not signal abandonment of de-escalation, but its signal is enforcement through clarity, resilience, and credible defense. Stability remains the end state. Preparedness becomes more visible along the way. Well, I would say UAE will not seek escalation, but it will not allow strategic ambiguity to invite repetition. This is not a pivot towards confrontation, but it is a recalibration towards credible deterrence anchored in sovereignty. And I would conclude by also stressing on that this is what we are facing cannot be taken by country. It should be through GCC, and this is the time for GCC unity. What happened is that it was a test for deterrence. All of us, we showed resilient against that. None of us failed, but still we need to be united in front of that. The other problem now, what we will face after the death of Khamenei, what will be the new regime is coming? Is it will continue because the ideological institution is entrenched in the system. Will be the new comers more pragmatic or more ideological? Will Iran will be more pragmatic and will be a natural state respecting the international order, stopping the dream of exporting the revolution? This is not yet clear.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ebtesam. And I think you concluded by saying, if I understood you correctly, that all of this has to be coordinated through a collective GCC cooperation and mechanism. And let me turn here to Dr. Abdulaziz. Dr. Abdulaziz, Saudi Arabia is the largest country in the GCC Cooperation Council, and it's a leading country for all the Gulf states. In this respect, do you see that Saudi Arabia is actually interested now to lead this defense strategy that accelerates GCC defense coordination, and especially its more integrated air and missile defense system? This is the question that many people are asking, but at the same time, one has to take into consideration how willing are the other members of the Gulf states to follow the Saudi lead in this regard, if that is the correct way of putting it. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I think this question, in my opinion, leadership has become somewhat of a sensitive topic in the GCC politics, and you all know the GCC and studied it far more than I did, so you could correct me on that, but I anticipate that that will invoke a great deal. A lot of it will invoke a great deal of sensitivities. If someone was to put it that way, that it's time that Saudi Arabia kind of takes the bull by the horn and just goes and leads this. I think it's because this is I think your point in your question is also very important. Is important. Because of that, will other GCC states kind of want to follow? I think we should enter into a discussion that's past that. In my opinion, I think now we have tried to look at the GCC as one big block. I know a lot of the times we always, as Gulfi kind of analysts, look at the situation and always remind people to say, listen, the Gulf is not monolithic. The Gulf is not monolithic. Please stop looking. Because I wear shamagh and Mohanad wears a ghutra, and it doesn't mean we all look alike, or we have fantastic, splendid caramel skin. It's far more deeper than that. But what I would say is that maybe there is now credence in treating the Gulf as a monolithic entity, because I think the protection of the GCC will mean the equal protection of each and every one of these states, respectively. So now I think when we start having a discussion from that point of departure and that kind of lens, this is where I think we will begin to really overcome the differences that we have. Because I'll be very honest with you, I shared this also recently in one of the interviews. They said, do you think now it's a time for GCC states that it will unite more? And I said, I hope so, but I'm not overly sure, but I hope so. And the reason why is because there have been many instances before where we've always said, oh, this is the time where the GCC will work together. Maybe it's better if the GCC will work together. Maybe, and then we don't see it. And in other parts, we see it diverging at times. But what I do think now, especially the divergence that we had recently in the GCC, what I do think is that while that divergence is there, I think, in my opinion, what has taken place in the February 28th strikes has not completely solved it, because I don't think it's solved. But what it did do is something very important, if we're going to be very honest. And I think it put it into perspective, which is that while we may diverge in some aspects and while we have fundamental disagreements in some aspects, the overarching security is something we agree on. And that I don't think it has ever gone. So now I think it's time to really do things differently. And I do sense that there is a need to be more integrated, or GCC integrated, through the aspects of air defense, through the aspects of intelligence. But in my opinion, I think the real integration is in the diplomacy, in my opinion, and at least as a bloc abroad. Because right now we're seeing people that genuinely want to separate us. You know, and a lot of the times there are these entities or there are these people that celebrate GCC divergence or inter-GCC divergence. This isn't going to be good for us. You know, we don't want to be a platform for other people's wars, and we don't want to be a topic for other people's discussions. We want to, we also, as the scholars and as the analysts, we also now in the GCC have to take responsibility, in my opinion. And we need to be a lot more louder, maybe more proactive, in my opinion, because unfortunately there's been an unhealthy rhetoric and unhealthy discourse lately about everyone demonizing each other. So I think from us, from our point of view, let's begin to create at least the discourse of commonality and unity, which is there, but we need to now elevate it. And I think, in my opinion, when we securitize the lack of unity, this is when it becomes something that's, I think, will resonate more. When we will say, listen, if we're to coin a phrase or to borrow a phrase from Hillary Clinton, stronger together. So I think if we're stronger together, we could definitely do a lot more things. Thankfully, no one's going to be running for office, so I don't think we're going to be in trouble for saying this. But I think stronger together is the way forward, and that's what I have to say.
We can't. Thank you, Dr. Aziz. We can't agree more that a collective GCC security arrangement is best for everyone. However, we know the reality and we know the history of what is been happening. Unfortunately, this hasn't happened. We hope that this is going to be a good lesson for all the Gulf states to learn from. Let me quickly move to our friend Rashid. Rashid, everyone is saying that all the Gulf states have now been attacked, but Qatar has been attacked once before. And the question is, how prepared was Qatar this time round than the previous time, and what implication do you think it has on Qatar?
Thank you, Doctor. If you see a degradation in video quality, it's because my iPad died and now I'm on my phone. But so Qatar was attacked in less than 7 months, 7-8 months, 2 times. Once by Iran and once by the Israelis. And I think all of that has created a lot of lessons learned. But maybe I can go through the experiences we faced before and how that changed yesterday. So as you all know, unfortunately, with the attack on Iran, we did not issue a shelter-in-place directive. We thought that Iran targeting us would be an impossibility, but unfortunately, it became a possibility. And I think that dreaded June night pushed a lot of changes when it comes to crisis management and preparedness. Yesterday, people living in Qatar have, received the awful noise of your phones. Dania knows it very well, of the phone early warning system before the strike happened and during the strike. So people were aware, people were, informed on how to deal with it. Messaging was clear from all government entities, very clear what you're going to do, where you're going to stay, That's in terms of managing the public. In terms militarily, I think Qatar has shown one of the highest level of interception rates of any country that facing such multiple salvos of missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. And when we calculated it today, based on the latest information, we're looking at a 97 to 98% interception rate with minimum injuries. And I think that is Gulf-wide. But in Qatar, because the attacks were focused on 2 to 3 targets, the main target being Al Udeid Air Base, but also, unfortunately, the Iranians targeted Qatari facilities and attempted to target civilian facilities, all intercepted, because it was a concentrated attack on one node. The high level of interception is quite impressive, because when you have a high level of attacks on a single node, saturation happens to air defense systems. Also, talking to some people in the military, in addition to some US military individuals, apparently yesterday many world records were broken when it comes to interception, meaning interception time, response. And today, in the morning, when we got our breakfast dose of missile salvos, we were able to intercept multiple cruise missiles using fighter jets. So, and you see this concept being developed, at least in the Qatar case, where you have integrated air defense that includes ground-based air defense, fighter jets, short-range air defense, counter-drone systems, and also attack helicopters. So, all in all, many lessons learned on the public management and on the military side. But of course, we hope we buy these systems and we train for them, hoping to never use them. To end, Dr. Abdullah, I agree with the assessments of all the guests. I like the idea of securitizing, even though securitization is always denoted negatively, but securitizing this unity, especially in the Gulf case, it shows. And I think the coming days will be very, very critical when it comes to the regional order. So, as we say in Arabic, Allah Kareem.
Allah Kareem. Let me just quickly ask a question that came from some of the audience. And the question basically says, I think we have lost Abdulaziz because he has a TV interview. Dr. Abdulaziz had to leave. We apologize for that. So one of the participants asked, you spoke about diversifying Gulf security procurement. What could be the role of countries like India, Russia, China, and others in this diversification? And what other sources could or should be considered, you think? Do you someone want to answer this very quickly? Rashid, go ahead.
So yeah, this is right up my alley. So basically, one of the things that at least I'm advocating for is diversifying defense acquisition outside of great power rivalry. And currently, we only have 2 great powers, which are the US and China, and developing defense industrial and defense acquisition relationships with powers outside this great power rivalry will be critical for developing to reducing the politicization of these defense acquisitions. If you buy something from the US, there's a political baggage attached to it. If you buy something from China, there is also political baggage attached to it. If I buy something from Lithuania, there's no political baggage attached to it. The issue with that is that the best air defense systems in the world are US. The best fighter jet systems are the US. So there is some level of compromise Gulf states need to do when it comes to diversification. One, be it capability compromisation, but also compromisation when it comes to interoperability, because if you buy the same equipment from the same country, interoperability is easier. When you diversify, interoperability becomes something of a challenge. So pushing towards more diversification is good when it comes to attaching the political baggage to it, to these acquisitions, but it does open, conduits and challenges that are solvable, but it would need a lot of effort.
Thank you, Rashid. That's very, very helpful. Let me just quickly also ask Dr. Ebtesam, because you are the one who alluded to this, where Abbas Arabchi has just recently acknowledged on Al Jazeera that the strikes affecting the mediator Oman was not a political decision, but it was a result of the autonomous military action. And you mentioned this in your presentation. Does this growing military autonomy increase the risk of uncontrolled escalation and undermine diplomatic engagement effort? This is a question from one of the participants.
Look, if units are acting based on previously issued general instruction without real-time oversights, this implies higher risk miscalculation. Also, difficulty in ensuring that states not directly involved in the conflict are not targeted. And also greater complexity for any mediation efforts or de-escalation arrangement, I would say. So Gulf state which has sought to avoid direct involvement are likely to interpret this statement as a signal that traditional deterrence centered on engaging the political leadership may no longer be sufficient. And I think that's what caused that there is attack against Oman also.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ebtesam. We are getting very close to the end of this panel. So let me ask Dr. Dania, what do you think is the threshold or red line that will compel a GCC state to respond militarily against Iran? I don't know if you want to answer this, or we can move it to Rashid, because that is his area, but feel free to do so. And this is one, this came from one of the participants.
Yeah, I could answer that. I think, it's not clear about how every Gulf state is going to respond, because I think different Gulf states have different calculations about, what would be their threshold and what would be the risk factor if they join the US against Iran. But I do think sustained and continued attacks on civilian structures outside of the bases is going to be crossing that threshold for the Gulf states. And I think if the Gulf states don't establish deterrence, I think they can end up like Syria, just having missiles flying. Luckily, the Gulf states are very privileged and have missiles, because this would have been a nightmare if that was not the fact. So I do think that there should be some sort of established deterrence. And I think if they responded collectively, it would be much stronger for everyone. And I agree with Rashid's point about that. I would like to bring up another point, if I may, about mediation is a topic that we talk about a lot when it comes to the Gulf states. And I think the last few months sort of created this mediation paradox in some ways. We all know that the Gulf states are conveners of mediation in different levels and different ways. And there's so many benefits to it, being relevant reduces abandonment, it reduces all kinds of risks, it de-escalates, especially if you're talking about regionally speaking, it's extremely important. But I think the assumption that institutionalized mediation shields small states from blowback is flawed, and I think that's something that needs to be reflected on. I know that Oman was not struck by politically, but was militarily struck. But still, Qatar was struck while mediating between Iran and the U.S., Israel, and Hamas. And so basically, facilitating communication between adversaries does not really guarantee insulation from the conflict, and that's something that should be taken away. And the fact is, if this overall mediation strategy is linked to this national security imperative of staying out of the crossfires, that needs to be reassessed. I'm not saying that mediation isn't valuable. It's extremely valuable, but maybe it's not going to assist in regards to shielding countries from attacks in particular conflicts.
So the whole thing about strategic hedging and having mediation as one of the tools is going to be questionable. Let me, before we end this very interesting panel and discussions, let me just go very quickly to see if there's anyone who wants to add anything. But please also, there is one last question from the participant about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and any effect on maritime navigation, whether it is in the Gulf or also in the Red Sea, etc. Please also bring that into your concluding remarks. So let's start with Dr. Ebtesam this time.
Okay, quickly, because I have another interview in 10 minutes.
Me too, yeah.
Look, of course, I think Araqji also said that there is no interest in Iran to close the Hormuz. But in the situation where there is no unity between the Iranian military, that might be also somebody take a decision to close Strait of Hormuz. Of course, this will be a catastrophe for all, even Iran in the Gulf, in terms of the maritime routes, in terms of oil, in terms of supply chain. So it will affect us all, and not us, the whole world also, because Gulf area is very important for the world, even the navigation system. And if you allow me, can I leave you now? Because I have to join another.
Totally understand.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Dania. Thank you, Rashid, and Dr. Abdullah as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ebtesam. We really appreciate your time and your insights and your contribution to this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Rashid, let's move to you if you have any concluding remarks or anything to add to this.
Of course. MashaAllah, you have a panel of celebrities, Dr. Abdullah. Everybody has an interview now. Well, nothing much to add. Maybe just the point of the Strait of Hormuz. We need to look at two things. One is the economic effects of course, economic, geopolitical events, effects of closing the strait, and then on the actual capability of closing the strait. In terms of effects, it'll be, as Dr. Ebtesam mentioned, catastrophic. One of the things I've heard from some economic analysts is that in a very short time, we might see oil prices hiked up to 100 plus, which we haven't seen in a very long time. And we have to remember that LNG prices are attached directly and affected directly by oil prices through index calculation, especially for medium and long-term LNG contracts. So it will totally wreak havoc on the energy market. In addition to the energy market, it will wreak havoc when it comes to insurance premiums. Insurance premiums are already high, but insurance premiums coverage of, and I'm talking about naval insurance, which is very expensive. would also wreak havoc there. So that's the economic potential effects. In terms of capability, I think closing the strait, like enforcing a blockade that cannot be then with the US military unblocked is very difficult. Looking at the current military capabilities of Iran, they will wreak havoc. They will cause a lot of damage, but I think in a very short time we can reopen the strait. But this is purely from a military capability point of view. In the end, I'd like to conclude that for the sake of Gulf continuity, unity when it comes to aspects of security has become an imperative. It's something we shouldn't ignore. And if we do, we risk sustaining potentially another devastating crisis like the one we're in. Even though I do see that this crisis might subside soon, inshallah.
Thank you. We all hope that it will subside soon and there will be more peace and stability in the region, because that is what we all aim for. Dr. Dania, do you want to add anything before we conclude? And you want to answer to any of the questions in the past that people have asked?
Sure. Well, first, I would like to say in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, one perspective is Oman is the lucky one, I think, in this conflict because of its location, and I don't know if it's going to be as much of as an effect for Oman as the other Gulf states. And I think the UAE has a way to bypass with a good amount of its oil, even if the Strait of Hormuz was closed. So there are some considerations, but obviously I would echo what my colleagues have said in terms of it being catastrophic economically speaking. Of course, the question does remain, how long can you sustain it closed? And, I think Iran has lately emphasized the point that they are not going to close it, at least in the near term. And that's not an option they have on the table right now. So yeah, there's a lot of consideration. And going back to the point about a collective approach of the Gulf states in deterring and also addressing threats, the point that I've always made over and over and over in all kinds of crises across the Gulf when I've covered it is, the Gulf states, especially after the Arab Spring, had a tendency to look at their national security interests at the expense of regional security interests. And when they don't balance the two, what happens is the regional security issue and sabotage their national security interests. And this is case and point of that. So hopefully, after this iteration, the Gulf states can find an equilibrium between their national security interests and their regional security interests, so they can maintain both and have a more stable Gulf region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dania. Let me just conclude by saying the Gulf states have been facing security challenges for a long time, and the Gulf Cooperation Council was one instrument that brings all the Gulf states to work together in a collective manner, and economically, politically, socially, and also other sectors. They have, to a certain extent, been able to work together, but it's not deep enough to be able to talk about a collective security arrangement. And the current infrastructure security cooperation falls short of all the expectations. Will this episode where not only one Gulf state is attacked, but here we are talking about all the 6 Gulf states have been attacked and are under fire, will this brings a different outlook for the leadership, for the people in the region to say, enough is enough, let's work together and let's get our security arrangement intact, and we can collaborate with all our, of course, neighbors, but also our alliances and so on. So this panel has talked about that, talked about the challenges, and talked about the possibility of collective security. So let me end by thanking, of course, the speakers here, Dr. Dania Thafer, Rashid, but also Dr. Ebtesam and Dr. Aziz, who've both left us for other interviews, and to thank the Gulf International Forum for organizing this very timely and important event. And also, I want to thank all the participants for joining us, for your questions, for your input, and please stay tuned to the Gulf International Forum and its activities. Thank you very much from all of us, and I wish you a good day, good evening, a good morning, depends where you are. And hopefully we will have another meeting in better times. Thank you all.